As this video presentation is quite long, it's a good idea to pause and play throughout. You will find a copy of this lesson plan template in Unit 3, Activity 18. You will notice that it is a very comprehensive template which is intended to help you prepare as thoroughly as is possible. This lesson plan is in 3 sections. 1. Information about the lesson. 2. The 5 phases of the lesson. And 3. Formative assessment. This presentation will focus on each of the 3 sections. The first 4 rows in the template are record-keeping purposes. Giving your lesson a title will help you focus your lesson planning process. In the next row of the lesson plan, we ask 2 key questions. Why am I teaching this particular lesson? And what is my reason for planning to teach it in this particular way? It may sound obvious, but it is very important to have a clear answer to both these questions. You may think that the aim or purpose of this lesson is given in the outcomes set out in the official curriculum or the textbook, but it is not necessarily the whole picture. This is where your role as mediator and interpreter and as curator of the curriculum come to the fore. Your teaching aims should not be expressed in the same way as the intended outcomes. If you don't want your course to become an impossible race to complete the curriculum, you need to choose and prioritize which curriculum elements to focus on and which ones can safely be deprioritized. When you plan your lessons, it is important to stop and think. Try and identify the 1 or 2 most important concepts or processes that you want your students to be able to know and do by the end of the lesson. You need to be very clear about what to prioritize and know what are the less crucial elements in the curriculum. Perhaps you could teach the less crucial elements more quickly, or deal with them in a different way altogether. For example, find a YouTube video that covers the topic and let your students watch the video. Or prepare a self-study worksheet to get the main ideas across quickly. Let your students work through it in pairs. In filling in the outcomes row in the lesson plan template, we ask, what should the students be able to know, do, and value as a result of this lesson? This is probably the most important question we ask in lesson planning, as it's the outcomes which describe the working competence to which all the other components of the lesson need to be aligned. It's also the outcomes that will be considered when the student's performance is assessed. Insert the assessment criteria into your lesson plan. They can be copied from the textbook or the official curriculum documents. In Report 191 courses, assessment criteria are not provided, but the detailed learning outcomes can be used as the equivalent to demonstrate competence. Assessment criteria or assessment standards provide the important detail of what the students can be assessed on. And in lessons that are backward planned, which is what the learning outcomes require us to do, it is as important for the students as it is for the lecturers to know what they will be assessed on and how. Assessment in TVET focuses on demonstrated competence. It is therefore very important that all students know upfront what they're going to be assessed on and how the assessment will take place. There should be no surprises. Here we ask, what content knowledge should be introduced in this lesson? While you rely on a textbook for what content to include, you, the lecturer, have knowledge, experience, or ideas of your own that could bring the topic alive or make it more relevant to the students. It's important to think about what it is you want your students to know. What is the knowledge content to be included in your lesson? Always check that the content selected aligns with the learning or subject outcomes. When content knowledge is relegated to the role of merely supporting particular learning outcomes, in other words, merely supporting what the students will be learning to do, we can end up with very fragmented learning. So it's important not only to ask what the students must learn to do, but also what they need to know. Working competence is the result of learning both skills and theory. However, it's the learning outcomes to which the content must be aligned, not the other way around. Hence, you need to start with the learning outcomes. The role of systematic knowledge in learning is weakened as unconnected bits of content are chosen only for the sake of providing an ingredient for the learning of this or that skill. The importance of systematic knowledge shrinks as it becomes subordinate to learning outcomes, along with learning activities and assessments, and may all but disappear. This in turn leads students to compartmentalize knowledge into small isolated chunks. It deprives students of the unifying bodies of systematic knowledge that enable them to build a coherent big picture of the subject as a complex system of interrelated concepts, facts, principles, and so on. For example, it's no use understanding how ignition, the fuel system, the timing system, and gears work as separate systems in a car. It's important to understand how all these systems combine to power a vehicle. The whole is greater than just the sum of the parts. If the students don't understand how all these systems combine to power a vehicle, if they do not understand the big picture, they are likely to feel like this confused appy in this slide. Starting with the outcomes, you need to ask what content is best suited to your teaching aims. But that is not enough. You also need to ask yourself what content knowledge will support the achievement of the intended learning outcomes, and what skills and theoretical knowledge together constitute working competence. In planning the overall teaching approach, we ask, how am I planning to enable this learning? A very brief but clear description is all you need to fill in on your lesson planning template. For example, short lecture and demonstration followed by practicing the skill, or video followed by question and answer and problem solving, or short lecture followed by role play, etc. Don't be tempted to start your lesson plan with the teaching methods first. Even if you have a good idea, it is important that you design down from the outcomes. The content must align to the outcomes and aims, not the other way around. Here we ask the question, how will you support your students to learn? What support will you provide to students with special needs and different levels of ability? You will need to think about seating arrangements and grouping in the classroom. What activities will you plan for your more capable students? And how will you ensure that it is not always the same student reporting on activities? How will you ensure that every student gets a chance to express themselves? Having worked through the first block of generic planning decisions, we come to the actual substance of the lesson, the 5 phases of a lesson which provide the detail. The second section of the lesson template provides a detailed guide on how to plan the body of the lesson. For each of the 5 phases of your lesson, you will need to determine how much time you will need, what you will do, what the students will do, what resources you will need to prepare. Here we ask the question, how will I grab my students' attention and motivate them to learn more about the lesson topic? Design a short stimulus activity to start your lesson off. For example, show a short video on the topic, ask some challenging questions, ask your students to solve a small problem. Before you start discussing new content, ask the students to tell you what they know about the topic. This introductory phase should not take more than 5 to 10 minutes. Phase 2 is about lecturer input. The key question we ask ourselves is, what do I want my students to be able to know, do, and value by the end of this lesson? The lecturer has 3 main tasks to plan: how to prepare clear and exact instructions for the learning activity to come. Like this first phase, this phase should take up as little time as possible. In your lesson planning, you can give time and ensure that all the students have a very clear idea of what they have to do by preparing a sheet of written instructions or any necessary content information. Plan and prepare resources needed for the lesson. Plan how to convey any subject content that's necessary. For example, technical background content. This could take the form of a brief interactive lecture, a demonstration, or a question and answer session. In phase 3, the focus is on the students actively involved in the learning. We ask the question, what kind of activities do we need to design to support the learning process? Plan activities that are suitable for individual work or pairs or group work. Allocate the largest part of the lesson time available to phase 3. Plan authentic and meaningful activities that clearly relate to developing practical expertise. The problems selected should be interesting to tackle and sufficiently complex to pose a challenge and keep the students engrossed, but it should not be so far outside their zone of proximal development that they become afraid to say anything in case they embarrass themselves. In phase 4 of our lesson planning, we create the opportunity for the students to demonstrate how they have been able to apply the content knowledge. Plan sufficient time for some form of report back or student presentation of results, be it in the form of a physical product that the students have made or an oral, poster-based or multimedia presentation, and or to discuss the learning activity. The 5th and concluding phase of the lesson planning process requires us to think about how to consolidate the key learning points of the lesson. For example, the lecture could conclude by explaining how the learning links to the learning outcomes or to what learning is to follow. What key concepts or terms do I want the students to take away and bring back to the next lesson? Although plans may differ for theory lessons, demonstrations, simulations, or workshop practicals, these 5 phases are generally applicable. Lesson planning also requires us to ask the question, how will we know that our students have learned? Formative assessment or assessment for learning forms an important and integral part of the learning process and takes place during that process, not at the end. Its main purpose is development rather than judgment of the student's performance. For this reason, it is important to integrate assessment activities as part of your planning process. Don't forget, all assessment tasks must be aligned to the learning outcomes. Formative assessment enables students to demonstrate and improve their learning. It is an opportunity for you to provide your students with feedback on their progress, what the student has done well, and what areas of learning may still need to be strengthened. This may be introduced as desired and when time and other resources allow. It could range from inviting someone from the workplace to address the students, only if they have a wealth of valuable experience and a gift of imparting this well, to downloading suitable videos for students to access, or to students applying what they have learned in more complex practical projects.